Quick and easy breakfast. Eggs, pepper jack cheese, butter. I took this out of the freezer, so it is frozen solid. I'm going to use a fork both to whisk the eggs and to break apart the butter. What I'm going to do is fork it a couple of times and it just makes a nice clean cut, kind of. Well, actually, scratch that. A very unclean cut. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put this butter pad in here and I'm going to break it up even further. So what I'm doing is basically crushing this butter into smaller chunks, pulverizing it, if you will, because it's going to mix with the eggs and have little frozen chunks of butter throughout the egg, which makes it cook very well because it floats in there. Very much like a buttermilk biscuit. When you use cold butter, I like to mix up a little cold butter with my eggs. So I'm going to go ahead and crack these. I'm going to make all 5. That's 1. And I'm going to just use the carton as my trash because I'm going to be throwing it out here shortly. That's 2. And I don't really need to count to 3. I'm sure we can all figure that out. Now that I'm getting close, I'm going to turn on my stove and hope that my camera setup here over the stove doesn't cause it to melt. But here's all of my eggs. And I like brown eggs for several reasons. One, they seem to have a little bit more eggy flavor. And I don't know if you can see this, but when you look into the egg, you can actually see if you caught any yolks accidentally, or excuse me, any shell. So I'm now fishing out the one little piece of red shell that I can find in here. And let me get that with my finger, just wipe that off. I've got a paper towel here handy. My pan is starting to heat up. And while that's happening, I'm going to whisk my eggs with the fork. And what I'm doing is I'm just pressing the tines against the side of the bowl and in kind of a circular motion. So what's happening is it's pulling in the new egg, and then I'm breaking up those proteins against the side with the tines. And as soon as I get all of the egg yolks and as much of that goo as I can feel, I'm just breaking it up against the side of the bowl. I want to get all the egg yolks combined, busted open, and I don't want there to be big pieces of strands of egg protein. I want this to be kind of fluffy, but not really. So just a little bit of whisking. I'm not seeing any more big pieces of egg in there. It's kind of starting to blend together. You can see the chunks of butter floating around. My pan is hot. I'm going to take a new utensil here because I just eggified that fork. And if I was not videoing this, it'd be a lot faster. So I would have just put the butter in the pan. The pan is super heated now. I'm going to throw in some butter. Set that aside. I'm going to adjust my camera angle here a little bit so you can see my butter going. I want to keep that butter moving so it doesn't brown. The pan was a little too hot, it's starting to brown. That's okay. What I'm going to do first, and this is interesting, is I have some toast that I actually toasted already. I'm going to put the darker side up, and I want that to absorb a little, as much of that butter as I possibly can on that one side. Put that right here in the middle of my pan. I need to break open my cheese, which I probably should have done in my preparation, but I did not, so here it is. I'm going to go with a big ol' 3 pieces of pepper jack. No paper. I like how they do that, but I also don't like how they do that. I'm going to turn this down. That butter is starting to be a little too hot, so I superheated the pan, and now my butter is burning, so there's going to be a burnt butter flavor. I'm going to get as much of that butter into this bread as I possibly can here. Lift it off the heat because it's starting to smoke. I want it to cool down a bit because that's just too hot. Take my egg mixture and I'm going to pour it not on my bread, but around my bread. See how hot that was? Whew, I'm glad I took it off the heat. I'm lifting it up high above the heat right now because I want it to cool down. And I'm just going to kind of let that egg do its thing. I'm not even on the heat. I am 10 inches above it at this point because I just want that pan to cool down a little bit. Set it back down here. I'm going to take my fingers, I'm just going to move this piece of bread around. I don't want to get a lot of egg underneath, but I also don't want it to be directly under there. I'm going to make sure this thing is turned down just a notch. It's on like 3 right now as far as the setting on the stovetop is concerned. So what I'm looking for now is a lid. And I'm just going to lid that really quick. And while that's happening, I'm going to put my cheese away, throw my eggs away, stick my butter that was in the freezer into the fridge because I was actually out of fridge butter. I like to keep butter in the freezer and then move a stick into the fridge as necessary. So let me just wrap that back up again so it's not exposed to the oxygen. Oxygen and food generally don't mix well unless you're attempting to dry age something and you don't really dry age butter. Got that all nice and wrapped up. Now I have soft spreadable butter for the future. Stick my utensils into the dishwasher because I don't like to dishwash. This is still on low with a nice cover. It's starting to it's starting to fog up a little bit, so there is steam. I'm rinsing out my egg bowl, and I'm going to throw that into the dishwasher as well, because why not? Probably shouldn't start that while I have a video going. Alright, so the lid's been on here for a little bit of time now, and I'm going to reposition the camera again a little bit closer here. And yes, I know my stovetop's a mess. Don't care. I don't eat or cook on those surfaces, so they clean up really well with this enamel, so it's get it dirty, doesn't matter, and then clean it off. And these burners, you can, you know, they're super cheap to replace. Super easy too. But that's another story. So my eggs have been sitting on here now for a little bit. I'm going to just give them a little bit of a turn here, just so that there's a wave action inside. Get some of that egg moving around. And I want to basically let it start to get to that point where it starts to set up a little bit. But right now, as you can see, is a great time to add some seasonings while that egg is still liquidy. So I'm going to add just a little bit of black pepper. Not a lot. Too much black pepper goes pretty quickly. Just in right amount. You want the spiciness, you want the flavor, but you don't necessarily want, you know, burning all the time. I'm adding a little bit of salt. I just go ahead and get some of that salt up in there. And I think today I'm going to use some of this Tony's Creole spicing. Just a little bit. Kind of feel like I want some of that in my egg. Egg's starting to blister and get a little brown around the edges, but I'm going to go ahead and stick that lid back on there now that it's seasoned. I have another piece of toast sitting here in the toaster on standby, waiting. And while that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and get out my favorite spatula. Well, for this type of an apparatus, I like, for this type of a thing, omelet or whatnot, I like this beveled one. It's kind of got an angle at the end, but it's kind of like a sharp angle. So it's really good for like digging into something, and then it bends like a fillet knife underneath it, so you can like scoop the edge of a thing out very easily with this apparatus, which is why it's also kind of warped, because it just goes down and scrapes the bottom, pulls stuff right out nice and easy, and because of that blade on the end, you can also cut things, well, soft things, obviously, but it can actually cut things pretty well too. It's a really good spatula, silicone head, wood stick, and One thing I noticed in these is when I'm looking at the store, I've had a lot of these that break right at this point, obviously, right where the wood goes into the sleeve. And when I'm in the store, what I'm looking for is actually this inner line. You can kind of see like a shadow there, this lollipop stick goes all the way up to here. So there's like this much up in here. Some of them are just down here, and that's just no bueno. They break real easy. All right, so my egg, I'm gonna just give it another little twist. Get some of that gushy egg all around. It's really starting to puff up now. That butter that's inside of the egg is, you know, releasing its love internally. It's not just one side of butter. And I'm gonna go ahead and take the lid off, set that aside. And what I want to do now is I want to cut these corners, which is again why I like this spatula. So I'm cutting this corner, cutting this corner.